So the idea is that if we were to merge and consolidate some of those institutions, some that we value but won't be able to go it alone, that might be a smart way to preserve them. It has happened before. I think alumni of the schools are not terribly happy with that prospect. But the business reality is that it's probably the case more of them will merge. But among those stronger institutions, I don't anticipate that proposition.
Hi, Dr. Franklin. My name is Pastor Aaron Phillips. And very refreshing to hear a theologian speak so eloquently and intelligently. You know, nationally,
my theologian friends would resemble that remark.
With the onset of President Barack Obama, nationally there's been an argument about whether or not we should keep Black History Month. We even had a local columnist who is an African American who declared that we may need to abolish Black History Month. Can you speak very briefly to that?
Of course, Black History Month, that we call it today, emerged in the mid-1920s from the brain of Carter G. Woodson, one of the first African Americans to earn a PhD from the University of Chicago. And Woodson believed it was important for the nation to pause and to recognize this often understudied and relatively unknown history of an important segment of the American population. I think it was a brilliant idea then, and to the extent that the idea was to call attention to what was then Negro History Week, and to enable the nation to really catch up its educational deficits with respect to Black history. It was exceedingly important. Over time, that Negro History Week became Negro History Month, and then Black History Month, and some call it African American History Month, and all of the wonderful nomenclature that accompanies our evolution and in identity. I think the long and short of it is what we want is to incorporate and infuse African American history, like Italian American history and Irish and Jewish and Asian American, into the mainstream of what gets taught to all of our students. I think when we reach that point, that's a point of enormous achievement. And I say it does no harm to preserve certain traditions like Black History Month. I don't think that's a problem. But I think that if we can ultimately infuse into the mainstream so that there's only one history and one story that incorporates all those voices, I think Obama's right. I mean, that's what we're aiming for and would love to see. But we're not there yet. And so I think it would be premature to begin to dismantle an important vehicle for reminding us all there's something here you need to learn this year, this month. And I think that's especially an invitation to non-African Americans. You know, when's the last time you read a book by an African American author? How has your knowledge grown about African American history in the past 12 months? And to the extent that it hasn't, I think it is important, again, for the strength of our great nation, for all Americans to be acquainted, especially with the African American story. All of our stories are important. But in a way, this group is the only group brought here to serve as slaves, to build a strong nation, and all of the extraordinary and tortured history. In a way, it is the most unique story in this wonderful panoply of American voices. Yes.
Certainly, we want to thank you for coming, and on behalf of all of us here, we are just very pleased to have you here. I'm from the class of '83, and we're kind of known
Morehouse.
At Morehouse, yes. We're kind of known as one of the last classes of Dr. Mays. Died that year. Could you speak to about Dr. Mays and his impact on your life?
Yes. He mentions the name Benjamin Elijah Mays, and I hope that that is a name I suspect most of you here are familiar with. There may be some of our young people and some who are less familiar with this history that don't know the name, but everyone should. Benjamin Mays. He was a minister, an educator, born and reared in South Carolina. He attended Bates College in Maine, somewhat unusual for that time. for man born in the late 19th century. He then came to Howard University, served as dean of the School of Religion, and ultimately his real calling, his real impact on American history occurred from 1940 to 1967 when he served as president of Morehouse College. 1940 to 1967. Dr. Benjamin Mays was president of Morehouse for 27 years, and during those years, recall now, Martin Luther King arrives in 1944 and is there from 44 to 48. So Mays is president, and if you read Dr. King's autobiography, the one person that he attributes the most important sense of a model of what I want to be when I grow up is Benjamin Elijah Mays. So you all do need to know that name and his history. But what Mays did at Morehouse was really quite extraordinary, because Morehouse had a daily chapel in those days. So at 8 a.m., all of the students at Morehouse gathered for chapel every day. We have evolved since then, and to the dismay of many of our older graduates, and so we no longer call it chapel. It's now called Crown Forum, because we actually have quite a diverse religious, cultural, and ethnic population at Morehouse College now. But we meet now just every other week, so it's twice a month. And I'll tell you, don't tell anybody, but my agenda is to see us increase the number of gatherings, because it's such an exciting time. When you walk into the auditorium, King Chapel, there's 2,000 young men seated there and ready to learn and ready to be inspired. And that's what Dr. Mays did every week at Morehouse, as he spoke to them. And the key message he gave to them was not failure, but low aim is the great sin in human existence. It's not failing, but it's aiming too low is the great failure. And I urge you to read Benjamin Elijah Mays' speeches and his writings. He's really an unknown giant and a hero to every Morehouse man. And it's a real privilege to follow Dr. Mays and a series of other leaders like Dr. Hugh Gloucester, who was my president, a great educator, and who was on the faculty of Hampton for many years, and then more recently, the very distinguished physicist, Dr. Walter Massey, who was president of the National Science Foundation and then president of Morehouse College for 12 years. So it's a real honor to serve in that line of presidents, and thank you for mentioning Dr. Mays' name.
Dr. Franklin, I knew you were good, but I didn't know you were great. And so thank you for an exceptional presentation. My question is, how aggressive is your recruitment of students from other countries, and how many do you currently have, and what's the most effective way of reaching them?
Oh, great questions, Vic. We, as I said earlier, in most colleges and universities in the country today, there are about 3% international student, non-U.S. students in the student body. Morehouse is actually at about that number, 3%. We are aggressively recruiting. My recruiting staff actually fights with each other to get to really great places to go and visit and to make the pitch. I always tell them that I'd actually like to go to Trinidad and offer the, but they say, no, Mr. President, we can't burden you with that kind of work. But the fact is that we are ramping up, and we are casting our net wider. And we're trying to do this in a cost-effective way. Obviously, we can't afford to travel in quite that same way. What we have done, and my Vice President of Development is here, Mr. Philip Howard, who is also, Phil, raise your hand, who's also a Morehouse grad. We have really designed a terrific website, and we're trying to channel and guide people to the website where they can have a video tour and learn more about the college. We have graduates of Morehouse who are now really literally around the world. And we have one of my favorite stories. A Morehouse man was operating a soul food restaurant in Paris. And so whenever you get to Paris, you had to go to, what was it called, Phil? It was a wonderful spot. But we have Morehouse students who are sons of former heads of state in several African countries, as mothers and fathers served in the diplomatic corps. So they've been good friends and partners, inviting us, and they're telling our story when we come to town. But again, my appeal to all of you today is we need more friends. We need more, all of you, to be recruiters. Now, they're great colleges, so I'm going to say again, I love Howard and Wilberforce and Cleveland State, all great institutions.